want your reaction to this headline here from the president in the last hour. So out on Truth social media platform, the president's following maybe some of the ECB commentary this morning, expectations that they'll reduce interest rates, and complaining, why isn't the Federal Reserve doing the same thing? And he ends this post with this line here, Mohamed: Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. Now, the debate we've had around the table is, how do you interpret that line? Is that someone waiting for the expiration of a term that takes place in May of next year, or someone who's thinking about doing things sooner?
So only President Trump knows what that means, but it should come as no surprise. We know that President Trump has been frustrated at the absence of interest rate cuts. I suspect he got very angry when he heard Chair Powell yesterday. Chair Powell really put all the blame on tariffs, gave no possibility to the better outcome, zero, give it zero possibility. And then there's one thing you have to remember. I know that the conventional wisdom is that this is an attack on the independence of the Fed. There is another way of looking at this, which is this Fed has sacrificed people in the past. If you remember, the president of the Dallas Fed, the president of the Boston Fed, the vice chair were sacrificed ahead of Congress looking into allegations of insider trading. If you remember, the potential side was sacrificed to protect the monetary policy side. And it wouldn't surprise me if President Trump is pushing on this, because there's a real question for Chair Powell. Should he step down to preserve the independence of the Fed? Because otherwise, the Fed will be the subject of a lot of attacks going forward.
If he did step down, would that call into question even more the independence of the Federal Reserve? What's the optimal outcome here?
So this is a judgment that has to be made, and has to be made by Chair Powell. There are credible candidates. Kevin Warsh, for example. The markets would be very comfortable with Kevin Warsh as the Fed chair. He has tremendous experience. He understands the markets. He understands economics. He has expertise. So, you know, I could see a scenario in which what Secretary Bassett said before the election plays out, where they pre-announce Kevin as the next chair, and then that puts tremendous pressure, and then Chair Powell has to make a very difficult decision. Let's
say that happens. And I know that's not your base case right now. You can tell us if it is, but it hasn't been before. Let's say it happens, though. How do you think the market would respond to that?
So I think the market would look at Kevin Warsh and think he's a very credible Fed chair. And I think the market would rather have a credible Fed chair that's not in continuous conflict with the White House than being in continuous conflict with the White House. The Harvard example is an illustration of what can happen. You can suddenly have all sorts of other things questioned about the Fed if it's in direct conflict with the White House.
Isn't this conversation alone putting in question the independence of the Fed? You're talking about scenarios where we could basically get around the White House to placate the president.
But we've seen that. Scenarios where they've gone around to Congress to placate the Congress. We've seen a situation where, in the beginning, they sacrificed the potential side. Michael Barr was the vice chair, and he stepped down. So I don't think this is a much a structural break, but I do think there's a very delicate judgment, Anne-Marie, here, very delicate, and I'm glad I don't have to make it.
Well, it almost sounds like you agree with the president in this sense. His termination cannot come fast enough, meaning when Powell's out of the job, it cannot be soon enough. It sounds like you agree with that.
So the word termination is a very strong word, right? That word, I must say, I looked at it and I thought, wow, that's a really strong word. But we do know that in a year's time, Chair Powell will step down. We know that. We know that he's not going for a third term. We know he's not going to get a third term. So, you know, that issue is out there. We also know the president is really frustrated about interest rates not being cut. And I go back, yesterday's comments by Chair Powell, which he went well beyond what he's said in the past, were like a red rag to the White House.